I grew up in a secluded area in the mountains, the nearest neighbor a good distance away. My parents were always cautious, seldom leaving me alone at home. But one summer afternoon, as they needed supplies from the nearby town, I convinced them to let me stay. I was eager for some solitude to lose myself in my favorite activity, drawing. As I was engrossed in my sketches, the sudden frantic barking of our dogs, Max and Bella, jolted me. They reacted like this only when someone approached our property. From my room on the upper floor, I hesitantly peeked outside. A wave of unease washed over me when I spotted a figure advancing up our long, winding driveway, obscured partially by the thick pines. The figure was now alarmingly close to our usually unlocked front door. Panicking, I dashed downstairs, securing the door just in time. It was like a scene from a thriller movie. Me locking the door and immediately hearing thuds against it, and the jiggling of the handle. I rushed to check the back door, then frantically called my dad, who cursed in worry upon hearing my voice. Then, the stranger moved towards our garage, and I was frozen in fear. I tried calling our closest neighbor, Mr. Johnson, a former police officer, but got no answer. The agonizing minutes stretched on until the man eventually left. My parents arrived home later, furious and concerned. It turned out the intruder was a disoriented neighbor from several miles away, known for his habitual drinking. He had mistakenly wandered to our place, looking for help after crashing his car. My father, protective and intimidating at over 6 feet tall, later confronted him, making it clear such trespassing was unacceptable. This event shook me deeply, leaving me wary of staying alone for a long time. The drunken neighbor and his family, living in a cramped, chaotic household, later tried to make amends by giving me a handmade dream catcher and a colorful woven blanket. Their home, I later learned, was involved in a police raid related to drug activities, and the grim discovery of neglected animals on their property added a dark twist to their already troubling behavior. As a partially sighted individual, with only a sliver of my vision functional, navigating the world had its challenges. This became starkly evident one evening at a local bar, waiting for my boyfriend Dean to pick me up. The bar was a 20-minute walk from my home, through a forested area, and past an old cathedral and graveyard. When Dean was delayed, I was engulfed in frustration and worry. That's when a group of inebriated men emerged from a nearby diner, their behavior unsettling. One of them got uncomfortably close, his touch and words sending a chill down my spine. I managed to scare them off with my assertive yelling, but in a moment of recklessness fueled by anger, I decided to walk home alone. With my cane and the guidance of my phone's screen reader, I started the precarious journey. But soon, my phone battery died, and the frightening realization that the men were following me set in. They were taunting me, and in a moment of utter panic, I understood that my only option was to try and run through the pitch-black forest. Lost and disoriented, I was on the brink of despair, when suddenly a car pulled up. The driver, a young man, had noticed the men and offered to drive me home. Despite the fear of getting into a car with a stranger, I was in such a state of terror that I accepted. He safely drove me home, and that experience profoundly changed me. Now, I never venture out alone in the dark, especially since I have the company of my faithful guide dog, the best companion I could ask for. I was 24 when this unnerving incident occurred. After a grueling night shift at the 24-hour bookstore downtown, I usually arrived back at my modest studio around 1 a.m. The area wasn't exactly upscale, but it beat living in my aunt's attic. I tossed my bag onto the chair by the door and ambled into the tiny kitchenette, craving a late-night snack. Just as I reached for a leftover sandwich in the fridge, something odd caught my attention. The bathroom door, which I distinctly remembered closing before leaving for work, was ajar. It might sound trivial, but I'm particular about these things for peace of mind. Stepping back into the main room, I called out, "Hello." The responsee was eerie silence. Pushing down the tendrils of fear, I strode across the room and flicked on the hallway light. "Jenny, is that you?" I half expected my neighbor, with whom I shared the bathroom, to be up to some strange antics. When I inched towards the bathroom, I cautiously pushed the door open. The sliver of light from the hallway spilled into the small space. Peering inside, I felt the chill of unease. It was empty, looking just as I had left it, with my toiletries lined up on the shelf. Slightly relieved, I closed the door and went back to the kitchenette, my sandwich forgotten. Instead, I turned on the small TV, settling on a classic horror flick. Suddenly, a muffled thud from the bathroom made my heart skip. Initially, I thought it might be Jenny being clumsy, a common occurrence. But the sound repeated, more distinctly this time, and definitely from the bathroom. "Jenny?" I called again. The microwave's beep startled me, and I laughed at my jumpiness. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Jenny read, "Hey, got held up at my sister's. Mind if I come by later to shower?" A cold wave of fear washed over me. I texted back rapidly, "Aren't you in the bathroom?" Her reply came swiftly, "No, why?" That's when I heard it again, a creak from the bathroom. I glanced up and froze. A large, shadowy figure stood in the doorway, a glint of metal in their hand. Panic surged through me. I bolted for the front door, the heavy sound of footsteps echoing behind me. They weren't rushing. There was a terrifying deliberateness to their pace. I didn't dare look back, racing down the fire escape and into the street where I called the police. The police arrived in minutes and scoured my apartment. They found no one, but on my tiny kitchen table, pinned under a coffee mug, was a note. It bore just a single word that haunts me to this day. Soon. Last year, a significant change happened in my life. I bought a cozy little house in a quaint suburb of Charleston. It was perfect for someone like me, living solo. Initially, everything about the new place felt just right. The house, with its 2 upstairs bedrooms and a pair of bathrooms, one up, one down, seemed tailor-made. It even had an unfinished basement, which I thought might come in handy someday. The real story began in my second week there. One night, something unusual happened. I'm usually a sound sleeper, but that night I found myself waking abruptly. The world outside was draped in darkness, yet there was this sound, distant and unclear. Curiosity got the better of me, and I left my bed to investigate. As I approached my bedroom door, a chilling sound reached my ears. It was laughter, but not the joyful kind. It was twisted, reminiscent of a sinister clown from a horror movie. It seemed distant, yet I couldn't pinpoint its source. At first, I thought it might be a sound from the street outside. Leaving my bedroom, the laughter seemed to grow louder, more present, as if it was emanating from within the house itself. My heart raced with fear, but I felt compelled to find its source. Tiptoeing across the house, I tried to make as little noise as possible. The trail led me to the basement door. It was ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. The malevolent laughter was unmistakably coming from there. Panic struck me like lightning. I dashed back to my room, locked the door, and stood there, paralyzed, the eerie laughter still audible. Hours seemed to drag on. Around 5 a.m., the house fell silent. I checked every corner when morning came, finding everything as I left it. Eventually, I gathered the courage to descend into the basement. The dim light barely illuminated the space, but what I saw in the middle of the ceiling froze me in place. A single red balloon drifting down from a ribbon. Without a second thought, I called the police. They searched but found nothing. No explanation, no closure. The incident remains a mystery, leaving me with questions that might never be answered. Growing up, I often found myself in the quiet comfort of our home in Edinburgh. My parents frequently travelled for business, leaving me in the large old house we called home. My elder brother, James, was usually at university, and my sister, Emma, worked late hours. So solitude became my familiar friend. One chilly Sunday in November, when I was 13, I faced an entire day alone. My parents were attending a conference in London, and James had a weekend field trip. Emma, unexpectedly, was out of town. Excitement bubbled within me. A whole day to myself meant endless video games and no one to nag about the volume. After my parents left, I turned my brother's old room, which we had transformed into a game room, into my sanctuary. It was at the far end of the upstairs hallway, equipped with the latest gaming console and a small fridge stocked with snacks. We had a separate internet connection for this room so that my gaming wouldn't interrupt the household's online activities. I was about to dive into a new game when I thought to call my friend, Alex, who lived nearby. Picking up my mobile, I texted him, inviting him over. His response was swift. He was having a tough time with his girlfriend and needed a mate to talk to. He'd be right over. As I headed downstairs to raid the kitchen for some comfort food, I caught a glimpse of something, or someone, out of the corner of my eye. A figure draped in grey with hair tied up in a tight bun stood silently in the shadows. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, but I shrugged it off as a trick of the light. Alex arrived shortly, and we settled in the kitchen with pizza and sodas. He poured out his troubles, and I listened, trying to offer advice. We decided to video call his girlfriend to clear the air, so we headed upstairs to the game room. As I set up the video call, Alex suddenly froze, staring into the hallway. "Mate, there's a woman out there, in grey," he whispered, his face pale. I felt a rush of fear, remembering the figure I'd seen earlier. We slammed the door shut, hearts pounding. I didn't tell Alex about my earlier encounter, but his description matched what I'd seen. We called my parents, insisting on leaving the house, but they urged us to stay put, as they were only a half-hour away. When my parents arrived, I recounted the events, but they dismissed it as our imaginations. However, strange things began happening around the house. My things would go missing or be moved, and the air in certain rooms felt unusually cold. Several weeks later, we adopted a cat, Whiskers, from a shelter. Almost immediately, she started behaving oddly, meowing at certain corners of the house, especially one in my room. Sometimes, she'd suddenly screech and dash away from these spots. To this day, Whiskers still meows at that same corner in my room every night, and I can't help but wonder about the mysterious figure Alex and I saw that day. It all started in the summer of 2018. Emily, had always been a bit of a homebody, especially since my parents often travelled, leaving me to manage our home in a newly developed suburb of Brisbane, Australia. The area, still somewhat remote and surrounded by bushland, had its share of unsettling elements, including occasional sightings of suspicious figures near the woods. Despite these concerns, I felt relatively secure in our home, bolstered by the presence of my 3 loyal dogs and the fact that our neighborhood was mostly populated by military families, including many of my dad's colleagues. However, that summer, a string of burglaries in our street had set me on edge. My parents, confident in the security measures of our home, a robust fence topped with spikes, left for their vacation, leaving me in charge. The first few days passed without incident, save for the typical rustlings in the garden, likely caused by local wildlife. One evening, after a trip to the local grocery store, I noticed a man rising from a bench in the parkland that bordered our street. Initially dismissing it as coincidence, my unease grew as he continued to follow me all the way to my house. Thankfully, my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, happened to be outside and struck up a conversation with me, causing the stranger to flee back towards the woods. Shaken, I informed my parents of the incident, but they assured me that the neighborhood was safe and that the dogs would protect me. Trying to shake off my anxiety, I continued with my daily routine. That night, as I settled into my parents' bedroom on the ground floor, a routine I followed whenever they were away, a series of thuds against the windows sent chills down my spine. My dogs, usually undisturbed by such noises, were now on high alert, growling at the shadows outside. Panic set in as the thuds grew louder and more frequent, moving from window to window. In a state of terror, I crouched in the dark center of the house, away from any windows, clutching my phone. When a shadow loomed at the front door, banging on the glass, I finally mustered the courage to call my parents. The intruder's relentless attempts to break in were loud enough for my mom to hear over the phone. Frantically, my dad called our neighbors and family for help. Mr. Thompson was the first to arrive, scaring the intruder off temporarily. Huddled under a table, I watched in terror as my family members arrived one by one, Uncle Jack, Aunt Sarah, and Grandma Joan, all ready to confront the intruder. Uncle Jack let the dogs out, who furiously chased the shadowy figure off our property. Together with Mr. Thompson, they checked every nook of our backyard, ensuring it was safe before I could muster the courage to emerge from my hiding spot. The intruder had vanished, leaving behind a cracked window and a damaged door. It was a night I would never forget, a stark reminder of the fragility of the safety we often take for granted. And though the police in Brisbane were an option, my family's immediate response had been the most comforting and effective in that harrowing moment. It was a crisp autumn night in a small town in Oregon. My parents, trusting me completely, had left for a weekend trip to Washington, leaving me, Ellie, to care for our old golden retriever, Max. They departed early on a Thursday and were due back late Sunday. Since I had the house to myself, I decided to set up a gaming marathon in the living room. Max, who preferred to sleep there, needed my attention, especially at night. As the clock neared dinner time on Friday, I texted my dad asking for money to order pizza. Cooking was the last thing on my mind. The pizza arrived sooner than I expected. Peering through the peephole, I saw the delivery man. He was of average build, with untidy light brown hair and dark circles under his eyes. The acrid smell of cigarettes seeped through the door. He was staring intently at the camera doorbell, a look of concern etched on his face. Upon opening the door just enough to receive the pizza, his gaze shifted to me and an unsettling smile crept onto his face. "Didn't expect someone young like you," he remarked. His comment made me uncomfortable. Attempting to brush it off, I chuckled awkwardly, reaching for the pizza. "How old are you?" he inquired, the grin still plastered on his face. "I don't share personal info, sorry," I responded, increasingly uneasy. He seemed annoyed but handed over the pizzas. I quickly gave him the tip I had set aside, hoping to end this interaction swiftly. He then asked if my parents were home. I lied. "Yeah, they're just in the other room." His next comment about liking shooter games, a reference to my paused game visible through the open door, was my cue to end this conversation. I firmly told him I had to go, but his demeanor shifted from creepy to hostile. Muttering under his breath, he left. I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling even after he drove away. Hours later, as I settled in with Max, I had almost forgotten the bizarre encounter. That was until I was jolted awake at 2 a.m. by Max's frantic barking. Glancing around in confusion, I froze as I saw a face peering in through the living room window. It was the pizza delivery man, now with a more menacing grin. Panic set in. I grabbed a baseball bat from my room and cautiously returned to the living room. The man had moved to the front door, knocking softly, suggesting in a twisted tone that we hang out. I yelled out a warning about calling the police, but he only became more aggressive. Locking myself and Max in my room, I dialed 911. The sound of my front door being forced open sent chills down my spine. As I whispered to the operator, my phone died. In total darkness, I hid in my closet, clutching Max to keep him quiet. The intruder searched my house, finally reaching my bedroom. I was holding my breath as he paused at the closet door. In those harrowing moments, I thought it was the end. But then, the saving sound of police sirens approached. Cursing, the man fled just as the police arrived. They found me and Max unharmed but shaken. The police later revealed that the man had a history of home invasions. The case remained open, but he was never caught. The incident has left a lasting impact on me. The thought that he's still out there is unsettling, and I've vowed never to open the door to strangers when I'm home alone again.